The merger is a brilliant episode of The Office, but it did make me feel feelings I didn't want to feel. This is the 8th episode of the 3rd season of The Office. This is directed by Ken Whittingham, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And it starts off with Jim wearing a rather fetching hat or headband. Everybody's packing up at Stamford. They're all getting ready. Well, those who are going are getting ready to go to Scranton. And Pam is very excited. And then they start to arrive. We have Hannah and then Tony and then Karen arrives and then Andy arrives. And I realised pretty quickly that one of two things were going to happen, and I've kind of made up my mind a little bit now. But when Andy first arrived, I kind of thought either they're going to get on really, really well, because I think they're quite similar, and also I feel like Andy wants to kiss up to authority, or Michael, this is Michael I'm talking about, or Michael and Andy won't get on well because I think they're too similar. Having now watched the rest of the episode, I feel like they're going to get on very, very well. Partly because Andy wants to kiss up to authority, partly because I think they're quite similar, and also because Andy clearly wants to annoy Dwight, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. So, honestly, I didn't really care for Andy as a character at Stamford. I just found him to be kind of boring, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does at Scranton. We then have a character called Martin, and then Jim arrives. I love how Michael greeted him, and then we have the hug. Pam basically runs to him, and they hug, and my heart absolutely melted. It's like old times. Except it isn't exactly like old times. Jim goes to sit in his seat, but of course Rainn is sitting there now. So things are not exactly as they were. And we basically have all of these introductions to the characters. Meanwhile, Kevin's just sitting there shredding things. And I have to say, I get it. I love a shredder. I actually broke my shredder. Just a little handheld thing. It wasn't like some huge industrial thing. But I broke it by over-shredding and getting overexcited and putting too much into it. And it got jammed. And it took a very long time to unjam it. So I can't be trusted with a shredder. But I definitely relate to Kevin's excitement. They then watched this orientation video, which was very, very bizarre. And then Andy did a piece de camera, or his documentary piece, and it was so bizarre seeing Andy talking to the camera or to the interviewer at Scranton. It really threw me, even though I knew he was at Scranton. It was so strange seeing him in that environment, and I'm so glad that presumably the bulk of the rest of every episode will be at Scranton. I had nothing against Stamford as an environment. The office design, the set design, actually really quite nice. I liked how they made it quite different to Scranton's layout. But it's not Scranton. So I'm looking forward to spending even more time here. And then Andy is also flirting with Angela, which is not going down well with Dwight at all. And Karen's having trouble with Phyllis's perfume. And it just seems like the Stamford lot are not exactly getting along very well with the Scranton lot, at least for now. We then have another meeting. Andy starts to jam with Michael. They're singing together, and then Michael asks, "Why are the new people on the table?" Which is not a sentence I ever thought anybody would say. And basically he's put, everybody's sitting on these seats on a table which can't be safe. And then he tries to force Tony to get on the table. This was definitely a really uncomfortable moment, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of Season 1 Michael. Season 1 Michael, I didn't like him. I really didn't. He was constantly inappropriate, constantly not aware of other people's feelings. And I feel like we got a little bit of that here as he tried to make Tony get on the table. It's worth pointing out that Tony is a larger individual. And Tony said that he didn't have the ability to get up, to step up onto the table. So Michael basically tried to lift him up or hoist him up. I don't know what action he was doing, but basically trying to help him up. And Tony decided in that moment that actually he was going to quit, which I don't blame him for. I absolutely don't blame him for it. And Michael realises that people are not liking him. Tony told him straight out that he's quitting because he doesn't get on well with Michael's management style. Completely fair. And Michael realises he needs to do something, so there's the flat tire stunt. And on the way back inside, I didn't like this. This is one of two moments that I really didn't like, because Karen is rubbing or patting Jim's back. I didn't think much of it from Jim's perspective. I just feel like Karen's quite hands-on, touchy-feely, but Pam saw it, and you could see the pain that Pam was feeling, and I didn't like that moment at all. Then the Stamford lot actually start to bond with the Scranton lot. I wonder how long it's going to be until I feel like it's no longer Stamford and Scranton merging, and that it is just Scranton. I can't imagine it would take very long. And they start to bond over their mutual hatred or distaste or embarrassment towards Michael. So at least they have something to bond over. Jan, however, is not happy. She phones Michael, having heard that Tony quit, and because Tony quit, Michael actually fired him, which doesn't make any sense, but nevertheless, he fired him, and this I thought was quite interesting, and I'd love for anybody in the States to explain this to me, but Jan said, because you fired him, we have to pay him severance. But Michael was able to fire him, I guess, under the guise of him not being a good worker, because he wasn't a team player or he didn't have the right attitude. In the UK, if you were fired because of bad behaviour, you don't get severance. You only get severance if you're made redundant because the company can't afford to keep you, not because of your work efforts. So is it true that if you're fired in the States for bad behaviour, if you're fired because you've done a bad job, do you still get severance pay? Because that's madness if that's true. And if that's not true, then this episode is just incorrect. If anybody can provide any information on that, please feel free to do so. I'm sure I could Google it. I did quickly Google it as it happens, and I didn't get a straight answer, and I think that's largely because I know in the States, well, at least in films and television, people will often say they've been fired when actually they've been made redundant. They've been let go, not because of work performance. So my Googling is picking up a lot of that language. So I'm not getting a straight answer, but I'm getting a lot of, you're not entitled to it, but some companies might. But I still think that's absolutely crazy for a company to give you money if you've been let go because of your work performance, which is what happened with Tony, because he didn't have the right work attitude, which is just absolutely ridiculous. But nevertheless, that's why Jan phoned. And she also phoned to tell Michael that Jim is his new number 2. Not Andy, not Dwight, it's Jim. And we knew this from the previous episode. We knew that he'd be offered the same position, but over at Scranton. And Jim officially working above Dwight is going to be very, very fun. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there. We then have the end of the episode. Well, 2 final scenes. One is Jim in his car. Actually, this made an earlier episode hurt. Or an earlier scene, rather. At the beginning, when Jim arrives, or near the beginning, he and Pam are talking alone, and Pam asks him if he wants to go for a drink that night, and Jim basically says no, he can't. He's doing stuff. I think he said he was still getting unpacked and settling in, and I'd love to know where he's finding these apartments with very short or flexible leases, because he's clearly moved twice in a very short space of time. And I thought, okay, fine, that's a reasonable excuse. I also thought maybe he wants to ease back into it and see where he stands with Pam. Fair enough. But then in this penultimate scene, he's on the phone with Karen and agrees or decides to go for a drink with her. And I just thought, why? You said no to Pam, yet now you're going out. And what if Pam sees you? Do you not care about that, having lied to her? Like, it's one thing if he maybe went to Karen's place for something to drink. He hasn't moved in with Karen. No, he hasn't moved in with Karen. That would be... No, I don't have any reason to believe that. But also it would make sense if you're looking for an apartment really quickly while you're still in a lease, presumably for somewhere else, to buddy up and it'll be cheaper. But I don't believe he's done that. But anyway, he was on the phone to Karen and I didn't like it, but I didn't overthink it. I just thought, maybe he's just wanting to go for a drink with somebody he's been spending a lot of time with recently. That's absolutely fine. And then he broke my heart, because he saw Pam crossing the car park and he got out and spoke to her, and he told her he started to see somebody. What? Why? No. Like, presumably this is Karen, and I don't understand. I also don't like his timing. I'm not saying he should have waited forever, But as far as I know, he wasn't seeing Karen in the previous episode. Just the way he was talking about maybe she should go to Scranton if she gets the offer. His language didn't make it seem like he was dating her at that point. This is assuming it's Karen he's dating. And then he knows he's coming back to Scranton. So does that mean he asked, or even anybody, does that mean he started dating somebody between the time of finding out he's coming back to Scranton and coming back to Scranton? It has to be Karen, because you wouldn't start a relationship when you're moving far away from where you currently are. And then on top of that, knowing he'd see Pam again, knowing it's going to stir up old feelings, unless he was dating somebody to try and protect himself from that. I just feel like it's a very bad decision, but I know he can't wait around forever. But I feel like at this time in his life, moving again, starting a new position at work, even if it's at Scranton, seeing Pam again, it just seems like a really bad decision, unless he is trying to protect himself from all kinds of feelings. So we'll see. We'll see what's happening there, but I honestly thought that we'd get some forward movement with Pam and Jim once he moved back. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen. At least not anytime soon. But we'll see. We will see. I'm desperate to find out, but I'm very, very nervous because I keep thinking something will happen and then something will happen and it never, ever does. My prediction now is that something will happen at the end of this season. They'll drag it out for this season. They'll maybe tease things a little bit. I expect Roy will come back in at some point with more of an important role. I'm really desperate to find out. And then we end. We end with Dwight and Andy arguing like children. Dwight says, "Why don't you go ahead and go die?" I'm looking forward to seeing. It's basically like having two Dwights in the office, which is not a fun experience. So I'm keen to see what happens there. I feel bad for not liking Karen because she's not a bad person. She's in the way. She is a roadblock to happiness, and I cannot wait to find out what happens next. Really, really looking forward to watching the rest of this season. Considering 2 seasons ago, I felt like I was struggling to enjoy the show, and I wasn't sure if I'd even get past season 1. Quite a turnaround. I've fallen very hard, and I'm very desperate to watch the next episode. The merger was definitely quite the roller coaster.